When Clint Eastwood walked onto the set of The Brenda Parker Show, the audience expected just another celebrity interview. Brenda Parker, the sharp-tongued host, known for dismantling conservative guests, was certain she could make the legendary actor and director look outdated and out of touch. What she didn't realize was that Clint wasn't just another guest. He was a man who had spent a lifetime standing firm in his beliefs, unshaken by pressure. And what happened next became television history, because in true Clint Eastwood style, he didn't just respond, he turned the entire interview into an unforgettable lesson about strength, wisdom, and never backing down. It was a stage bathed in sleek, modern appeal, the studio lights gleaming off the polished black floor. Cool-toned backdrops cast a sharp contrast against the minimalist decor, and a neon-lit logo glowed above the Brenda Parker Show. Inside, the air buzzed with electric anticipation. A live audience, packed shoulder to shoulder, was primed for what was being teased as the interview of the year. Brenda Parker, the host, sat in her dressing room, scanning her notes with laser focus. A woman in her early 40s, Brenda had built her career on sharp wit, cutting interviews and a knack for cornering conservative guests into viral moments that left them scrambling for a comeback. Her show had become a breeding ground for controversy, racking up millions of views as she challenged old-school perspectives, always positioning herself as the voice of modern progress. Tonight, she had a target unlike any other: Clint Eastwood. At 94, Eastwood was more than just an actor. He was an institution, a relic, some would say, of an era that Hollywood had long since evolved past. His career spanned decades, from the silent grit of the spaghetti westerns to the hard-nosed, no-nonsense characters in Dirty Harry and Gran Torino. But it wasn't just his filmography that kept him in the headlines. Eastwood was known for his blunt, conservative views, a man who had never bent to Hollywood's shifting tides, and Brenda Parker was ready to make an example of him. The producers had been hyping the segment all week, teasing a heated debate on masculinity, politics, and the future of Hollywood. Social media had already exploded in anticipation. Some users cheered Brenda on. "Take him down, Brenda. We don't need his outdated nonsense anymore." Others, die-hard Eastwood fans, were just as vocal. "They're going to try to ambush him, but Clint is built different. Just watch." Backstage, the final countdown began. Brenda took a deep breath, straightened her blazer, and stepped into the glaring spotlight of the studio. The crowd erupted in applause as the cameras panned over them, capturing their eager faces. As the intro music faded, Brenda flashed her signature smirk at the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we have a legend in the house," she announced, her voice dripping with charm, but edged with something sharper. A stagehand signaled, and the applause swelled as Clint Eastwood was walking in. The moment Clint Eastwood stepped onto the stage, the atmosphere changed. He moved with the same deliberate ease that had made him a cinematic icon for over 60 years. His frame, though leaner with age, carried a presence that demanded attention. He wasn't flashy. He never had been. Dressed in a simple dark suit with an open-collared shirt, he looked like a man who had seen it all and had little left to prove. The audience's applause was mixed, some standing in admiration, others clapping politely but waiting, eager to see Brenda do what she did best. Brenda greeted him with a wide smile, stepping forward to shake his hand. "Clint, welcome to the show," she said, her voice warm, calculated. "Thanks," Clint said simply, his handshake firm, his expression unreadable. He took a seat, settling into the plush chair across from her, legs casually crossed, hands folded. Unlike Brenda, who sat upright with a rehearsed precision, Clint looked like a man who had wandered into a conversation and wasn't particularly worried about the outcome. The camera zoomed in, capturing the moment. Brenda started with the usual pleasantries. "You've had a legendary career," she said smoothly. "Actor, director, producer. You've given us films that shaped generations. Dirty Harry, Unforgiven, Gran Torino, some of the most iconic roles in Hollywood history." Clint nodded. "Appreciate that." But Brenda continued, leaning forward slightly, her tone shifting. "Let's be honest. Men like you are a dying breed." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some chuckled, others leaned in. This was what they had come for. Brenda's smile didn't waver. She had done this before. "You've built your legacy playing strong, Independent men. Men who don't apologize, who take charge, who solve problems their own way. But times have changed, haven't they? A well-timed pause. She let the question hang in the air, waiting for Clint to respond, waiting for him to stumble or push back in a way that would feed the viral moment she wanted. Clint simply nodded again, his face unreadable. "Guess we'll see," he said, his voice low. Even Brenda blinked, just for a second. She hadn't expected that. She had expected an argument, a defense, some kind of reaction she could sink her teeth into. But instead, Clint sat there, unbothered, as if he had seen this play out 100 times before. The audience was watching closely now, sensing the tension shift. Brenda regrouped, pressing forward. "So do you think Hollywood has moved on from that kind of masculinity? Do you think it's time to leave those old ideas behind?" She arched a brow, her confidence returning. Clint smirked, ever so slightly, and just like that, the game had begun. Brenda leaned in, her eyes locking onto Clint's like a predator eyeing its prey. The pleasantries were over now. It was time to strike. "Let's talk about masculinity, Clint," she began, her voice smooth but edged with challenge. "The tough guy, the lone cowboy, the man's man. Some say that kind of thinking belongs in the past." The audience chuckled, some nodding in agreement. Brenda's smirk widened as she pressed on. "Do you think Hollywood has outgrown your kind of hero?" The camera zoomed in on Clint's face. No reaction, just that same measured calm, the kind that had made his characters legendary. Brenda, sensing an easy win, went further. "Do you think young men today should still be looking up to the Dirty Harry type? Or is it time to move on?" A few more laughs from the crowd. She had him cornered, or so she thought. The words hung in the air, waiting for Clint to defend himself. Maybe he'd grumble about the good old days or dismiss the criticism outright. Either way, she was ready to pick his response apart, to show how out of touch he had become. But Clint didn't flinch. He didn't frown, shift, or look even remotely bothered. Instead, he just sat there, unmoved, unbothered. Brenda tapped her pen on her clipboard, waiting. The tension in the room thickened. The audience, expecting a sharp rebuttal, or at least some kind of reaction, grew restless. But Clint Eastwood wasn't playing her game. He reached for his water glass, took a slow, deliberate sip, and set it back down. Still, he said nothing. Brenda's smirk flickered just for a second. Something was off. She had expected resistance, a fight, an old-school Hollywood legend doubling down on the past. Instead, Clint was doing something far more dangerous. He was making her words feel smaller with nothing more than his silence. She cleared her throat, regaining her composure. "Well," she said, forcing a small chuckle, "I'd love to hear your take." The audience murmured. And finally Clint spoke. He leaned back in his chair as if he had all the time in the world. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low, even, controlled. "Times change," he said, "but principles don't." The studio went silent. Brenda blinked. That wasn't the answer she had expected. She had set the stage for a debate, a culture war, a clash of ideologies. She had primed the audience to see Clint as an old relic of Hollywood's past, someone clinging to outdated values. But now, with just 5 words, Clint had taken her entire argument and stripped it down to something much simpler, something she hadn't planned for. The crowd murmured. Some people exchanged glances, unsure whether to laugh or clap. Even Brenda hesitated for a second before recovering. "Well," she said, a rehearsed grin creeping back onto her face, "that's a nice sentiment, Clint. But what does that mean in today's world? What does principle look like when we're talking about gender roles, equality, and a more inclusive Hollywood?" Clint tilted his head slightly, studying her as if he were deciding whether or not to engage. Then he smirked. "It means strength isn't a bad thing," he said simply. "It means accountability still matters. And it means a man should stand by what he believes, no matter what the world says about it." A few audience members clapped. Brenda's fingers tightened slightly around her clipboard. She had underestimated him. She had expected arrogance or outdated stubbornness. Instead, Clint was giving her something else. Calm, steady, and unshakable conviction. Brenda leaned forward. "But doesn't that kind of thinking hold society back? Don't we need to redefine strength? To evolve past these old school ideas of what a man should be? Clint raised an eyebrow. Define evolve. The audience chuckled. Brenda let out a sharp breath. This was slipping away from her, but she wasn't done yet. She regrouped, adjusting her posture, readying her next move. I'm saying, Clint, that we live in a time where strength isn't just about being the toughest guy in the room. Clint gave a slow nod. Never said it was. The crowd murmured again. Brenda felt the momentum shifting. She was supposed to be leading this conversation, guiding the narrative, but somehow, Clint had taken control without raising his voice, without reacting, without even arguing. He was forcing her to chase the moment, and for the first time in her career, Brenda Parker wasn't sure if she was winning. The tension in the studio was thick enough to cut with a knife. Clint Eastwood, the man who had spent his life portraying unwavering, unshakable characters, slowly leaned forward in his chair. The movement was small, almost imperceptible, but it shifted the entire dynamic of the room. His eyes locked onto Brenda Parker's. His voice, when it came, was low and deliberate. Let me ask you something, he said, his words slow, measured. If a man walks into your house tonight with bad intentions, do you want a poet or a protector? The audience gasped. For a split second, Brenda's expression flickered, just long enough for the cameras to catch it. She hadn't expected that. She had expected defensiveness, anger, maybe even a canned response about changing times. But Clint had done something far more dangerous. He had forced her to think. A few audience members clapped, others murmured among themselves. This was the moment. Brenda quickly regained her composure, forcing a tight smile. That's an oversimplification, she said, her voice light, dismissive. Violence isn't the answer to everything. Clint didn't blink. He didn't even move. His voice remained steady, unbothered. Nobody said it was, he replied, but strength is never outdated. Silence. The words hung in the air, sinking into the bones of the room. For the first time since the interview began, Brenda didn't immediately respond. Her mind was racing, searching for a way to turn the momentum back in her favor. But Clint had just done what he had always done best. He had cut through the noise, through the overanalysis, through the endless intellectual debates. He had spoken in truth, and truth had weight. The energy in the room had shifted. The audience wasn't laughing anymore. Brenda sat up straighter, adjusting her posture. She wasn't going to let this slip away. Time to pivot. Brenda inhaled deeply, regaining her footing. She wasn't about to lose control of the conversation. She adjusted her papers on the desk, forcing an easy smile, but her eyes were sharper now. This was still her show, and she wasn't about to let Clint dictate the direction. So, Clint, she said smoothly, shifting gears, you've supported conservative ideals for years. Don't you think that's why Hollywood has distanced itself from you? A few murmurs from the audience. The implication was clear. Hollywood had moved forward, and Clint had stayed behind. But Clint, he just shrugged. Hollywood doesn't make legends, he said, his voice as steady as ever. Legends make Hollywood. The audience reacted, some laughing, some clapping, even a few hesitant cheers. Brenda's smile faltered. She wasn't expecting this much pushback from the crowd. But Clint wasn't done. He adjusted in his seat, keeping his gaze locked on Brenda. Brenda, you know, he continued, his voice easy but firm. Back when I started, Hollywood wasn't about following trends. It wasn't about making people comfortable. It was about telling stories that meant something, that lasted. He gestured lightly to the audience. That's why you still talk about my movies 50 years later. A wave of applause rippled through the crowd. Brenda tightened her jaw. She leaned forward, refusing to let him dictate the terms of the conversation. But don't you think people should evolve? She pressed. That we should embrace progress over tradition? Clint tilted his head slightly. He let the silence sit for a moment before responding. Progress is good, he said finally, but losing your backbone isn't. The words hit like a hammer. The audience reacted instantly, some clapping, others nodding. Even those who had started the night firmly on Brenda's side were rethinking the conversation. Brenda exhaled, feeling the power shift in the room. She had walked into this interview expecting to dismantle a relic of the past. Instead, she was realizing something unsettling. Clint Eastwood wasn't a relic. He was a reminder. A reminder that some things didn't fade with time. A reminder that some voices didn't get drowned out by shifting tides. A reminder that no matter how much the world changed, principles, real principles, remained. And right now, in front of millions of viewers, Clint Eastwood was proving that standing firm in what you believe wasn't just old-fashioned, it was timeless. Brenda Parker's carefully controlled expression was starting to crack. She could feel the shift in the room, the subtle yet undeniable change in the audience's energy. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She had entered this interview expecting to challenge Clint Eastwood, to expose him as an outdated relic of Hollywood's past. Instead, she was the one struggling to hold on to control, but she wasn't finished yet. Brenda straightened her shoulders and forced an easy laugh, though it sounded slightly forced now. "Clint, you've had an incredible career. No doubt about that," she said, her voice taking on a more patronizing tone. "But let's be honest, you're 94. Isn't it time to pass the torch? Let the younger generation lead?" Some in the audience chuckled, sensing her attempt to reassert dominance. This was the moment she would frame Clint as outdated, as a man clinging to a world that no longer existed. But Clint, he just smirked. "Funny," he said, tilting his head slightly, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "I remember when people respected their elders instead of trying to replace them." The audience erupted. Laughter, applause, cheers. Brenda clenched her jaw, quickly masking her frustration with another practiced smile. But she could feel it, the loss of control, the moment slipping through her fingers like sand. Clint leaned back in his chair, completely at ease. If Brenda was rattled, he wasn't. If she was scrambling, he was steady. "Wisdom doesn't expire, sweetheart," he said, his voice calm, unwavering. "It just gets ignored by people who think they know everything." The audience roared. Brenda shifted in her seat, gripping her clipboard tighter. This wasn't just a setback. It was a full-blown power shift, and Clint Eastwood, the man she thought would be on the defensive, was now leading the conversation, and the world was watching. Even before the interview ended, social media was already on fire. Someone in the audience had recorded Clint's comeback and uploaded it to Twitter. Within minutes, the clip was spreading like wildfire, retweeted thousands of times, then tens of thousands. By the time the show wrapped up, Clint clapback was the #1 trending topic worldwide. Clint just schooled woke Hollywood. Never underestimate a legend. This is why you don't challenge a man who's been outsmarting people since before you were born. Commentators, YouTubers, and podcasters rushed to break down the moment, pausing the video frame by frame to analyze Brenda's reaction, the shift in her posture, the way her confident smirk faded just slightly as Clint turned the tables. Even mainstream media couldn't ignore it. Some headlines praised Clint's response. "Clint Eastwood shuts down talk show host in legendary fashion. 94 years old, still the coolest man in the room." Others framed it differently, trying to control the damage. Brenda Parker faces backlash after tense exchange with Clint Eastwood. Did Clint dodge the real questions, or just prove he's still a master of the mic? Meanwhile, talk show hosts and political pundits weighed in. A conservative commentator on a late-night panel smirked as he watched the clip playback. This is what happens when you try to lecture a man who spent a lifetime standing his ground. Brenda walked into that interview thinking she'd make Clint look weak. Turns out, she just made herself look unprepared. On the other side, Brenda's defenders scrambled to rewrite the narrative. "She asked tough questions," one commentator insisted. "Clint didn't actually answer anything. He just used old-school charm to dodge the points she was making." But it didn't matter. The internet had already decided who won. Brenda's name was trending, but not in the way she had planned. Memes flooded social media, showing Clint leaning back with his smirk, while captions read, "Wisdom doesn't expire, sweetheart." "Pass the torch?" "Nah, kid, I built the torch." 94 years old and still making Hollywood nervous. Somewhere in the middle of it all, Brenda Parker sat in her dressing room, scrolling through her phone, her expression unreadable. She had wanted a viral moment. She had gotten one, just not the one she expected. And as for Clint, he was nowhere to be found. No tweets, no interviews, no victory lap. Because Clint Eastwood didn't need to explain himself. He had already said everything he needed to say. A week later, in a quiet corner of Carmel, California, Clint Eastwood sat at a small outdoor cafe, dressed in a simple jacket and jeans. He looked exactly as he always had, unbothered, relaxed, and completely uninterested in the media frenzy still swirling around his name. A few tables away, a journalist, armed with a notepad and a microphone, spotted him. She hesitated for a moment, then took her chance. "Mr. Eastwood?" she called, approaching cautiously. "Do you have any comment on the viral interview?" Clint looked up, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, he just stared at her, as if debating whether or not the conversation was worth his time. Then he smirked. "Nope." And just like that, he picked up his coffee, took a sip, and went back to enjoying his morning. The journalist waited, hoping for more, maybe a follow-up, a reflection, a deeper comment on what had happened. But Clint had already moved on. Because real legends don't explain themselves. They just stand their ground. And that's the thing about Clint Eastwood. He doesn't need to say much to make a lasting impression. That viral interview wasn't just entertainment. It was a reminder of the timeless value of strength, conviction, and staying true to yourself, no matter the circumstances. So what do you think? Was Clint's calm and steady approach the ultimate win? Or did Brenda bring up important points that need to be heard? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more incredible tales and inspiring lessons. Until next time, remember, times may change, but standing firm in your principles never goes out of style.